right, so now that we've read our story, we're getting ready to answer some questions. And just like last week, you're going to see that these questions tell you what paragraph to go back and find that phrase or that word. And this week, all of our questions are going to be about figurative language. So phrases that might sound a little funny, but the author's using them to kind of emphasize a point he's trying to make. And we'll look at some examples here in a second. So same idea as last week, we're going to find them in the text, read maybe the sentence before, the sentence after to kind of remind ourselves what that part was about so that we can make the best prediction on what we think the phrase means. So number 1 says, what does the phrase, a whole rainbow of squares, tell the reader in paragraph 4? So first thing I see is paragraph 4, and I'm looking for the phrase, a whole rainbow of squares. So what do I think it means when he said, a whole rainbow of squares? Let's go back in and see. We might already have an idea, thinking about a rainbow, but let's see if we can find it in the text. Paragraph 4 is labeled for us, and we're looking for a whole rainbow of colors. So I'm going to read, oh, there it is, a whole rainbow of squares. So let me read starting from the beginning of this paragraph. The scraps of fabric were cut into small squares. Every possible piece was used. There was a whole rainbow of squares to be used, some with different patterns as well. So I'm noticing different patterns, and when I think about a rainbow, rainbow makes me think of different colors. So let's go back into the question and see if there's something that suggests different colors, different patterns, lots of different quilt squares. So A, many different sizes were used. When I think about the word rainbow, I don't think sizes is the first thing that comes to mind. When I think about rainbow, I'm thinking about colors. Okay, let's look at choice B. Many different colors were used, a whole rainbow of squares. Yeah, that's what I was thinking to start. Many different colors makes me think of a rainbow. When you picture a rainbow, all the different colors in the rainbow, right? Let's check our other answers just to be sure. C, the fabric squares were shaped into rainbows. Is that what they meant when they said rainbows? It says there was a whole rainbow of squares to be used, some with different patterns as well. I don't remember them telling us that they were going to cut those squares to be shaped into rainbows, so that one's not in the text, so we can eliminate it or get rid of it. D, the fabric squares had rainbows painted on them. So this is where figurative language, which is also called non-literal language, means these squares, the quilt squares, the fabric squares, didn't literally have rainbows on them. Okay, so the fabric didn't literally, there weren't actually rainbows painted on the squares. But the reason it made him think of a rainbow, or he said a whole rainbow of squares, is because they were made of so many different colors. So they didn't literally have rainbows on them. Instead, all of the colors reminded him of a rainbow. So best answer is B. Let's take a look at number 2. What does painful process mean in paragraph 4? So I'm finding paragraph 4, and I'm looking for those words, painful process. So when they described a painful process, what did that mean? Okay, so I read the first part. Let's see here. All right, after the squares were cut, women would get together and begin the painful process of sewing them together. This could take hours and hours of work. Sometimes many women would gather at a home to work on one quilt. So what I'm noticing here is it says that after they were cut, they would start the painful process of sewing them together. Painful. Does that mean like it actually literally hurts to sew them? Or is he trying to suggest something else? A clue here is it says this would take hours and hours of work. So let's check our answer choices. A painful process means making quilts are fun. When you hear painful, does that make you think of fun? Not really. Making quilts is boring. Boring and painful. Those don't quite mean the same thing to me. Making quilts must be done alone. Well, in the story, it said that sometimes many women would gather at a home to work on one quilt. They would talk, share stories about their children, and even get help with problems. So in the text, it doesn't say that they did it alone. In fact, they did it together. D says making quilts take a lot of time. Hey, that sounds pretty good to me because I remember in the text it said that they would begin the painful process of sewing them together, and this could take hours and hours of work. So when he says painful process, he doesn't literally mean they're getting hurt or they're in pain, but instead they're starting a really long, complicated process that's going to take them hours and hours to sew the quilt together. So for painful process, best choice here is it means that those quilts are going to take a really long time to make. We'll do one more together. At the end of paragraph 4, what does "it made their needles fly" mean? So here's another good example, figurative language. Are their needles literally flying in the air? No, that's not what the author meant. So we've got to figure out, what does he mean when he said their needles were flying? Paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 had a lot of figurative language. Let's find it. So I think we left off here. Sometimes they would gather at a home to work on one quilt. They would talk, share stories about their children, and even get help with problems. The time spent as a group was very important. It helped them to feel connected with their friends. With so many women sewing together, it made their needles fly. So I'm noticing they're hanging out together, they're talking about their children, they're getting help from each other, they're sharing stories, they're feeling connected with their friends, and it made their needles fly when so many women were working together. So let's see which of these choices kind of helps explain why their needles were flying. Not literally flying, but which one is it? The women wanted to sew many quilts? It made their needles fly, and that means that they wanted to sew many quilts? That one doesn't really make sense to me. The women decided to use new needles, so using new needles made their needles fly? The women were able to sew very quickly? Okay, maybe when I think about flying, I'm thinking about like a plane flying really fast. Or if you say he was flying, that kind of suggests that he was going really fast. So maybe the women threw their needles across the room. Did they actually throw their needles across the room and make them fly? No, we didn't see that. So I'm thinking C, but let's just double check. The women were able to sew very quickly. So their needles were flying. Let's think about that. If you were with friends working together, do you think it would go faster than working alone? Probably. And especially because they would talk and share stories and help each other, and they connected with each other. Think about it. When you are working together with friends or spending time with friends, don't you feel like time sometimes goes faster? Like if you're doing something by yourself, it can sometimes feel really slow and boring, but when you're with your friends and telling stories, it makes time feel like it's going really fast. So when I think of this expression, that they were working together and it made their needles fly, I think that means that because they were together, everyone was able to sew very quickly, and it made the quilt making process feel faster. So best answer, C. Notice these phrases that we found today didn't literally mean what they sounded like. So they weren't actually rainbow squares. Sewing isn't actually painful in this, and then their needles weren't actually flying. Instead, the author used those phrases to kind of help paint a picture in your brain of what he was trying to describe. So figurative language is helping you visualize what's happening in the story. So to finish up, you have 2 more questions to do here on this Nearpod, number 4 and number 5. Don't forget to find the paragraph that it says, underline the phrase, and then think about which of these makes sense based on the story. You got this. Go ahead and get started.